Just talk about that. Mr. Chris Sarandon. Mr. Ken Page.
You know, I want to say you guys are wildly different careers, even though, of course, your connecting thread is Tim and Henry's movie. But your careers aren't that wildly different because you started in theater, right, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you know, come on, Jerry Dandridge.
It's been a long day. Yes, Ken and I, in fact, we both have done shows on Broadway.
Yep.
And yes. Yeah, so we both have deep theater backgrounds.
Ken, your theater background is also your current life, too. That never stopped. Can you talk a little bit about how you broke into theater as a young man in New York, right?
Well, first in St. Louis.
Okay.
I was lucky enough to start out at a place there called the Muni, which is an outdoor theater that seats 11,000 people. Mm-hmm. So I got to watch shows there, which was how I really became associated with what theater was, musical theater in particular.
Right.
And then I started out there in the ensemble at 18 and got my equity card, and that took me to New York. And on from there.
Yeah. And Chris,
The rest is history.
The rest is history. But your career is not St. Louis, but you came from Virginia, West Virginia, right?
West Virginia, right?
Yeah.
That's where I'm
But all
born and raised.
roads lead back to New York for you too, isn't that what happened?
Yes, yeah. And I live just outside the city now as well.
So let's start with you. I mean, obviously, we know Chris not only from his iconic turn in my all-time favorite vampire movie. Okay, we do even have to say his name. We will, Fright Night. Jerry freaking Dandridge. But again, he's never stopped acting. He's, you know, if you really know cinema, you know him in Dog Day Afternoon, one of the greatest performances of the 1970s. I Smile Back is a recent movie with Chris starring Sarah Silverman, a really uninhibited role for Sarah, and Chris plays her dad. And he's only on screen maybe 10 minutes, but it's one of your greatest performances, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're very kind.
But let's talk a little bit about, for you as a young man, in West Virginia, you know, it's not exactly Hollywood. How did the acting bug bite you? Who was the first actor you saw the first time you actually said, I want to do that?
Interesting figure of speech.
Yeah, exactly.
What bit me.
Yeah.
Well, I was in college, bada bing. I was in college, and I was busy majoring in popularity, and I was involved in politics, and I was coordinating homecoming weekend, and I was doing this, and I was doing that. And I took an acting class just for the hell of it, because I thought it would be an easy grade. We've all done that at some point in our lives, right? And the professor said, oh, I'm doing a production. It's just a little small laboratory production. Would you like to play it's just a bit part. It won't take much time. And I said, I don't have the time. I've got leadership conference. I have this and that. And he said, really, it won't take much time, and you really should do this. So I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And everybody wore togas, which helped. And so I did that play, and then he said, oh, and the next one coming up, I want you to play the lead in a play called Tartuffe, which is by a famous French playwright named Molière. And it just so happens that the current Miss West Virginia is going to be playing opposite you. And I went, okay. Why not? And that's when it bit. That's when I was gone.
Yeah.
I loved the experience. It wasn't about her. It was really about doing the play and getting to wear a fake nose and a wig and stuff. You know, you get to dress up. It's funny because when my kids were growing up, they would always say to Dad, why don't you want to dress up at Halloween? And I tell them, you know, I dress up for a living. I don't
your
have
job,
to,
yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Anyway, so that was the beginning. I dropped everything. I moved out of the fraternity house. I moved in with a sweet, very sweet old lady, and she and I cooked food together, and I was her, you know, like roommate and housemate, really. And then I just went on from there. I was in every production I could be in. Then I went to graduate school and got a degree in performing arts. And then I went to New Haven and got a job in the theater there. And then I went to New York and got a Broadway show.
And then suddenly movies.
Crazy.
And then you never looked back. I mean,
Yeah, crazy.
But Ken, you haven't done a lot of film. You've done some.
Some, yeah.
But, I mean, you're a titan on Broadway. You're a major theatrical performer. Cats, I mean, the list goes on. But can you talk a little bit about being a struggling young actor when, you know, Chris can speak on this too. I mean, anytime you're taking the road less traveled, there's temptation to throw in that towel.
Right.
tell me a little bit about those times when those darker days, maybe where you persevered.
Well, you know, I can honestly say I never considered throwing in the towel. I just never considered it because I went to New York. That was it. That's what I went for, to do theater and be in the theater. And no matter how tough it got, it was like, well, what can I do to stay? It was like, how can I leave, you know? But I did have one job. It was a very fast progression for me, which I'm always grateful for, but I worked at the Department of Social Services in the Xerox department. Very exciting job.
Wow.
You know, and they usually didn't hire theater people because they knew you would leave as soon as you got a job. And there was this old man, he was wonderful, and he said, "You're not in the theater, are you?" I said, "Absolutely not." And I wasn't at the time, so I wasn't lying, you know. And I did get my first job, which was a children's theater tour of Huckleberry Finn.
Who did you play?
And I, well, the boat, you know, the raft. No, I played Jim.
All right.
And I went to him and I said, you know, I've gotten this job. And he looked at me really close. He said, "It's not an acting job, is it?" I said, "Yes, it is, I confess it." But the good side of that story is when I got a Broadway show, my first Broadway show, I went back and I gave him tickets to my first Broadway show. And he was like, "Yeah, well, good, you made good at least. That's a good thing, you know." But for me, the struggling days really weren't a lot. I hate to say it because you always want to say, "Oh, I struggled and I cried and I carried on." But it was all very compressed for me. I was there. Like I said, I got that first job, and then from that I got a tour of a show called Pearly, a musical, and we went on tour, and then we came right back, and I did my first Broadway show, which was Guys and Dolls, and this was all like within about a 2-year period. So some people had been there for 5 years, and they were like, "You've got to be kidding me, you got a Broadway show." But I didn't realize it could take that long. I just thought this was the way it happened. It was that fast, you know. And after that, let's see, Guys and Dolls, and I went into a musical called The Wiz on Broadway and playing the Lion for about 2 years. And then I did a wonderful show. They now call them jukebox musicals. I hate that. But it's a show called Ain't Misbehavin', which celebrated the music of Thomas Fats Waller, which was great. And then into Cats. And I'm sure who hasn't heard of Cats somewhere, you know. But so I was very lucky. My trajectory was very quick through, you know. And after Cats, I thought to myself, I think I better go to Hollywood and try it, you know, because I thought, well, I can stay here and I can keep doing this, or I can go there and see what else I can do, and then other things happen through that. But Nightmare Before Christmas sort of came after I went to LA, and someone called and said they were looking for someone sort of like a Fats Waller type, and and a Cab Calloway, sort of somewhere in between those two. And my lawyer, interestingly enough, also handled Danny Elfman, and he said, "I think I know the person," and so on and so on. And that's how I basically got into Nightmare Before Christmas. But this is all within, I think I was in New York for 10 years altogether by the time all this happened. So I now look back and realize, as far as hard times, I didn't have any hard times. You know, people were there for years and didn't get a show. And I was lucky within 5 to 6 to get 3 different Broadway shows in a row. So,
you know, just before we get again to where the two of you met, I don't even actually, maybe you didn't even share space when you were doing Nightmare, but we'll get to that. Just a couple little films that I want to talk to you quickly about. Is anyone here a fan of the 1977 satanic thriller, the Sentinel? Right, you should see it. It's directed by a guy named Michael Winner, who you know, I befriended him in his later days. Nice guy, but I heard not so nice back in the day. Can you talk a little bit about working on the Sentinel?
Do I have to?
Yeah, you do. Because I've started, and now they're all ears.
Well, it was not a pleasant experience. I can't think of a moment making that movie where I had a good time, and that's the only movie I've ever made where I say that about.
Yeah.
Everything else I've ever made, whether they were successful or not, there was something valuable to be gained from it. I gained nothing from doing that movie. So sorry.
Was that no? It's okay. So I kind of knew that. So were you disillusioned by acting at all after that?
In fact, I almost quit the business. I decided I had to go on some sort of a walkabout, so I bought a ticket to Kenya. And I literally got on a plane and I flew to Kenya. I talked to a couple of people that I knew who had gone there a number of times. I was going out with a woman at the time who was a friend of somebody who went there every year. And I went to Kenya and I flew into Nairobi and I walked into a car rental place and I said, "Give me a car." And I started driving. And I drove all through Kenya and Tanzania and all through
Just by yourself?
By myself. It was nuts.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I had a number of very enlightening and extraordinary experiences while I was there. So it was a great thing that I did.
Yeah.
But it was nuts for me to do.
And then you came back and you started movies like Cuba.
Yeah.
And well, several movies before Fright Night.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. A bunch.
Can you just, before we, again, get to Nightmare, we all want to hear a little bit about Fright Night. Now, we have a mutual friend in your director, Tom Holland, the great Tom Holland. But how did you get cast for the role of Jerry Dandridge? A little bit about that.
At the time, I was living in New York City, and I got the script, and I had been doing a lot of stuff for a lot of TV specials. I did a couple of Hallmark Hall of Fames. I did a production of Tale of Two Cities. I did an adaptation of a Thomas Wolfe book called You Can't Go Home Again, and I thought I was a really hot S-H-I-T actor, right? That I was, I was classically trained, and I was playing Sidney Carton and Charles Donnet in the Tale of Two Cities, and I got the script called Fright Night. And I looked at it and I went, this is what is this? This is a horror movie. I can't do a horror movie.
Yeah.
I'm a very, I'm a kind of high-class guy. And I said, but I have to read it because it's only, it's rude not to. That was in a day when you got a script and you always read it. Yeah. And so I sat down and read it, and literally within 10 pages, I was like, holy moly, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's if Hitchcock made a vampire movie.
Oh, and I finished it, and I said, I have to meet these people. So I told my agent, and they set up a meeting with me and Tom and Herb Jaffe, the producer, and we got together. They flew me out to California, and I sat down with them, and Tom Holland literally described Fright Night. He described every shot of the movie from the beginning to the end. He told me exactly how he was going to shoot it, told me what happened in each scene, and when he finished, I said, okay, let's go. Yeah. I'm ready. Yeah. I mean, I was totally convinced because it was a brilliant script, and I thought this guy has the vision to do this. Mm-hmm. It was and it was also at a very special time when the vampire genre was fading, and movies were it was being satirized.
Well, there's even a line in it.
Love at first bite.
Yeah, because that killed all the vampires. But there's that line in it that Roddy McDowall has where he says, all people want now is people in ski masks hacking up young virgins. That was kind of it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. So that's where movies were going, and also the vampire genre itself, nobody took it seriously anymore. Yeah. And Tom's approach was brilliant because it was that, and this is a very important distinction to me, he had fun with the genre, but he didn't make fun of it.
Yeah.
And that's important. And so we played everything very straight. When we rehearsed, when we worked on the characters, we all did character backgrounds. Mm-hmm. We approached it in a very sort of organic way. And I think that's one of the reasons why the movie was really successful, because the people were real.
Sure, and has endured, too. It's some of the great horror movies, it's a good movie first. The genre is kind of lost in the mix down the line. But Nightmare Before Christmas, okay, so an amazing film, an iconic film. Tim Burton had just done the Batman films, right? So he was a name. We all knew who Tim Burton was. Did you know who Tim Burton was, Ken? Were you aware of him?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Tim Burton, I think for anybody who was interested in films at all, anything he did previous to Nightmare Before Christmas was noteworthy. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the chronology. Yeah, Beetlejuice.
There's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice. It was an arc.
All of those, yeah. Beetlejuice was great fun.
Yeah.
I keep hoping. I think they are working on a musical of Beetlejuice. So. Yeah, I sing, so that's why I'm always referencing musical things. But at any rate, yeah, maybe. I get to do it again.
Yeah, so you go ahead.
Oh, no, they're also doing a musical of Princess Bride.
Yes. Yeah, I saw it.
Well, there's your Wesley right there. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it had been attempted about 7 or 8, 10 years ago with a composer. I was in a musical at the time, the composer, and was working with William Goldman, and they had a falling out, so that didn't work out. But now Disney is doing it.
Obviously the cult fan base based around many of your films and around Nightmare is substantial. But I mean, that movie was made before there was this real surge in fan culture. You kind of did these movies, you didn't know if anyone was really paying attention. Made a few bucks, disappeared onto video, and then off you go. When was the first time you realized that Nightmare Before Christmas was a big freaking deal, Ken?
Well, I was doing a production of Three Penny Opera, which is a musical. And some of the younger people on the crew who were very goth, they were very goth, you know. And they came into me and they said, "Hey, dude, I hear you're like one of the voices in Nightmare Before Christmas." And I said, "Yeah, you know," and they told me that they go to this club, and every night on the weekends, at the end of the night, they play the Oogie Boogie song. And I said, "Why? You know, why did you do it?" He said, "Oh, dude, you don't know? It's like really cool, super cool." And from this guy, he started telling me about all the things that were going on that was connected to Nightmare Before Christmas. And I had no idea there was an underground thing at all going on. And it was, I don't know if it was the zenith it is at now, but you know, it was certainly had already started long before I was aware of it. So that was the first time I really knew that people were sort of dealing with the film outside of its original, you know, release.
Yeah. Similar story to share about being aware of the films?
I think I became aware of it when they did the 3D version.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they invited me to the opening, and I suddenly realized, wait a minute, they've made the movie. People have been seeing it for a long time. Why are they doing a 3D? It must be popular. You know, it must be. And also, from the fans, it became very clear. Coming to these fan get-togethers, that it had taken on another life.
Right. You know, there's always, in you know, when it comes to Hollywood, it comes to acting, comes to film, it's always kind of like the wizard behind the curtain. A lot of us don't know really what goes on, what the mechanics are. But it's even, I think, even more shadowy when it comes to what goes on in the recording booth and some of these things, right? Like it's really secret handshake. But Oogie Boogie, you must have worked very closely with Danny Elfman, because you sang, but Chris, you didn't. So let's talk a little bit. Let's get back to you, but let's talk a little bit about you and your process with Danny.
Well, when they originally approached, like I said, through my lawyer, you know, they wanted someone who had the qualities they were looking for. And they asked me, what would be your take? You know, they showed me the storyboard and blah, 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 blah. And they asked me, what would your idea be for the kind of voicing? And I said to them that I thought, from what I could see, that it looked like something that should be somewhere between the voice of the demon in The Exorcist, and Bert Lahr from The Wizard of Oz. And Danny said, "Oh, wow, yeah." And you know, our director, Henry Selick, and they both thought, they had not thought about that. I said, if I go too far this way, you'll let me know. If I go too far that way, you let me know. So it was really, you know, as you record music especially, you can do it line by line by line, like we do some of the voice recording. But we took it in sections, and he also, because the song is, I won't say it's a takeoff, but it's certainly an homage to a Cab Calloway song called St. James Infirmary. And we really wanted to make sure that we kept the feeling of Cab Calloway in it with whatever I was going to do with the character voice, which took a little work to make sure they both were synthesized together and part of what the finished product was. But it was a ball because I loved singing it. It's a great song. And Danny was very open with what I wanted to do and everything. It seemed to make him really happy because I think it's kind of what he wanted to do, but he didn't necessarily have all the facility for that. So it was sort of like his voice through my body, if you will. And that was fine with me, you know.
Was this the first musical that Danny had done? Like, I mean, he'd obviously done soundtracks for Tim for a long time and for other people. He was also in Oingo Boingo, he was a rock star. But he'd ever done like an opera like this, like a musical?
You know, I'm not sure. Somehow I doubt it, but I'm not sure.
This was the first time for him, yeah. So, Chris, talk about you. Did you work at all with Danny? I mean, Chris is the voice of Jack Skellington. However, Danny is the singing voice of Jack Skellington. Yeah.
No, never met Danny. In fact, never met him through the entire shoot, and only met him after.
And so you and Henry are the ones that
Henry and I, and then at the very end, when Henry and I had finished and they had a work print of the movie, they sent it to me, and then Tim and I went back in the studio and we did ADR, which is you lip sync to the image on the screen, and we redid a lot of the lines.
It must have been a little bit easier to do ADR to an animated film, was it?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, to me, one of the greatest love stories in this kind of cinema is Sally and Jack. It really is beautiful. And anyone who doesn't shed a tear at the final moments of that movie must be soul dead. Did you work with Catherine O'Hara at all? Were you bounced off each other?
Catherine and I worked together one time.
Yeah.
At one recording session.
Okay.
And I think we did maybe two, possibly several of the scenes together. But the rest of the time I was by myself. I never worked with anybody else.
Do we have any questions before I blather on to infinity? I'm going to go right in front, right here. Oh, wait.
Mike.
Oh, yeah, we got a mic here. I keep forgetting this mic. Do you want to stand up? And then we can all hear your lovely voice.
I've learned that because this movie took such a long time to make, I've heard there has been several difficulties into making that film. Like, I've learned that Oogie Boogie was such a nightmare to the staff. And especially the scene where they were, when Jack was turning the doorknob. But do you know anything about, like, was that all of that show? Do you know anything about the difficulty that they had when they made the
Were you a nightmare?
behind the scenes?
Were you a nightmare on set? Ken, were you?
Look, that's not what I meant. I mean,
No,
like,
I know.
we know what you.
was
we know
Oogie
what you
Boogie really a difficult character to make? And the doorknob scene, you know, where Jack opens the Christmas door that ultimately takes into Christmas land.
Well, I don't know specifically, to be honest with you, but I know that, any of the characters, moving those armatures, it was like, I can't even think of what the millimeter of an inch they would move them at a time per frame was crazy. And I think the more interactive they probably were with any set piece, it probably made it that much more difficult. Just moving them as they would move was enough, but having to actually contact something probably made it more difficult.
I was told that during the shooting, because we would, I don't know about you, but I was flown up like every 3 or 4 months to do a scene or 2 scenes or 3, and then they would animate those scenes. Then I would come back a few months later and I would do a few more. And I was told that at the time they had 3 or 4 working sets, that is, areas that they worked at this studio where they were shooting the movie, and that all those sets were working continuously all the time on different scenes from the movie, and that they ended up with approximately 11 seconds of usable, cut-together scenes per week.
Jesus.
Wow.
That's how exhaustingly minute the work was.
And this was before, nowadays they would tweak it with computer generation.
Yeah,
No,
nothing- no
back then it
computers.
was all stop motion.
No
from
computer,
stem to
stop
stern.
action,
Yeah.
all the way.
All of it, yeah.
Chris, I just wanted to say I'm a big fan, and it's a pleasure to finally meet you. How did you feel when they called you back to do the remake of Fright Night for that scene on the road?
Actually, they sent me the script and asked if there was a role I'd like to play in the movie because they thought it would be kind of cool. And I thought this was the character I wanted to play because it's a kind of fitting that it's the passing of the torch in a way, except it's the passing of the blood, and that he consumes the character that he becomes. So that's how it happened. They sent me the script, and I said, "Oh, great, let me do this one."
And what was it like doing Star Trek Deep Space Nine?
Oh, great! Yeah, those shows were, it's at the time that was what was it, like the 3rd iteration of the show, 2nd or 3rd?
It was the 3rd show, yeah.
Yeah, the 3rd in the
Unless you count
series
the
of Star Trek
animated,
shows.
yeah.
And it was like a machine in the sense that it was, they knew what they were doing. The scripts were very much sort of tight all the way through. So it was a very comfortable situation to work in. Yeah, and I knew a couple of the actors. I knew Rene Auberjonois from the theater. I knew Armin Shimmerman because he and I did a play together. Yeah. So it was comfortable.
Thank you.
We
Thanks.
love Prince Humperdinck. Thank you.
Thank you.
So first of all, it's awesome to meet you guys. I absolutely love The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Great.
But one thing, like when I'm around voice actors of characters, I try and see how much I can detect the character's voice in theirs, and I can very much hear Oogie Boogie in Ken's voice, but it's kind of difficult to hear Jack Skellington's voice in your actual voice. Could you maybe do the Jack Skellington voice?
No.
Okay.
It's copyrighted because I do all kinds of things for them. I do I do voice ringtones. I do the games. So they asked me not to perform it in any other venue other than for Disney in a recording. But thank you for asking.
It's a great question, man.
Hi, so my question is about Fright Night. One of my favorite scenes is the club scene when Jerry's kind of taking his control over Amy. And that's the easiest way to say it. What was the process of making that scene like? Like, did Tom kind of have a view of how he wanted it done and you kind of tweaked it a little bit, or did you and Amanda kind of go over like, this is how we're gonna dance, and this is the kind of message we're gonna?
Well, we didn't create the dance. There was a choreographer,
Okay.
and the choreographer did the whole thing, and she had to choreograph it for both Amy and me. That is Amanda and I,
Yep.
and for Amanda and me, and she also had to choreograph it for just Amanda. Because she did,
right, the
you know,
mirror.
there's a section where she dances in the mirror and you don't see Jerry.
Yeah.
So that's the way that was put together, and it was very highly choreographed. There was no improvisation per se in it, because also the camera had to be locked off to do it 2 different ways, with me and without me. So there was no room for error in terms of it's being done differently the second time through, for instance, without me. It had to be done exactly the same way. Okay?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank
So it was
you.
very by the numbers.
My question was about the Princess Bride. If you had any fond memories of Andre, or what your favorite part of working on the movie was.
Probably just the first 6 weeks we were on location in North Derbyshire, South Yorkshire, in a town called Sheffield. And we were all in the same hotel, and we were all, you know, we were riding every day, practicing. The guys were practicing the sword fight every day. Even though that was going to be done later, they had to have that down again. Talk about choreography.
Oh.
That was choreographed within an inch of its life. Actually, a funny story that Mandy Patinkin tells is that they rehearsed that forever. And then they shot it on the set. It took, I don't know, probably close to a week to shoot, maybe a little less. He was never injured, never nicked. The only time he was hurt was during the Miracle Max scene, because he laughed so hard he cracked a rib.
Is that true?
True. Yeah. Because Billy, that was the only part of the movie that was in any way improvised. Billy did, Billy Crystal, every take, something else.
Yeah.
And they had a very hard time hanging on.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Sure.
Hi. Okay, so first of all, I have a sort of a correction and omission. How did this get made reference? Anyways, so earlier you mentioned you didn't think that Danny Elfman did a musical. He did. He did a movie called The Forbidden Zone.
Oh, right, for his brother. Yeah,
Yes,
that's right. Yeah.
yes, and in fact, he played a character that was
Hervé
very much.
Villachez is in it, right? For
Yes,
Fantasy Island.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
He played a character
about
that
that.
is very much like Oogie Boogie. He played the devil.
Yes.
Second, but now I actually have a question for Ken. So earlier you mentioned that being like a Broadway person, you hear about musicals and stuff like that may or may not be coming to fruition. And everyone knows about, the Spider-Man poo parade and everything like that. And you constantly hear about, Back to the Future is going to be a musical and all this kind of thing. Is there anything that you've heard about that you've sat there and go, that's a bad idea, or that's a really good idea, or whatever?
Many things. Good and bad. There's a few things coming down the pike that you're like, oh, please don't do a musical of that, but they are. And there's some wonderful things, that come along that are musicalized, that are terrific. It's hard to say because you don't know what will really work anymore, truly. SpongeBob SquarePants is on Broadway now and nominated for a lot of Tony Awards. And
It's an excellent soundtrack.
I'm sure, but apparently it is. I mean, I haven't seen it, so I don't know. But when I first heard it, I thought, are you kidding me? And Margaritaville, which is, Jimmy Buffett's music and so forth. So, yeah, I heard. But so, you never know what's going to work. I think the thing is, now the public's taste is wide and varied, and Broadway has answered that in the sense of bringing to the stage there what people want to see. It used to be a little bit more of what Broadway wanted to create and present to people. Now it's a little more Mean Girls is a musical and, things like that. So there's a lot of talk that sort of runs like a subterranean river about Nightmare Before Christmas becoming a Broadway musical. Every now and again it sort of rears up and raises its head and then it disappears again. Interestingly, I think that would be actually a great idea. With the advances in stage technology, they really could do it. A few years ago when they talked about it, I thought, well, good luck with that, you know. But now they really could do it and be true to what the film represented and bring it to the stage. I know a lot of sort of renegade productions are done in community theaters and high schools and things. No doubt somebody's probably looking at them all and going, okay, we like that, we'll keep that, we'll take that.
I do remember seeing an all blacklight version of Nightmare Before Christmas. Oh, wow. Yeah. It was...
Yeah, so there's all that to explore, you know. I just hope they do it while I can still do Oogie Boogie and move around a little, you know.
It's a great question, man.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you very much.
Hey, I had one question for Chris and one for Ken. Ken, what was your favorite song that you did for Oogie Boogie?
Favorite song? Well, I really only did one, which is the Oogie Boogie song. You know, I had a little bit in the beginning, you know, and This Is Halloween, but it's only like a line, you know. But I have to say, when you get a song like the Oogie Boogie song, you don't need another one, you know? I mean, it's pretty terrific. And it also, in some ways, oddly, with a song that's written that well to be done, it can dissipate the impact by having other ones, you know?
That's right.
So it's kind of terrific that the character has that one great song and it comes where it comes and so forth. But it was only really the one song.
And Chris, what was your favorite scene you did?
I think the scenes that I remember most were the scenes where I had to scream and yell. Don't ask me why. I just remember them very vividly as Henry directed me. Oh no, make the scream longer. Can you howl it, go way up and then drop it off at the end? Okay, now we need one that's 3 seconds long. Now we need one that's 10 seconds long. Those were fun. I had a good time doing those.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jack.
Hi.
Hello.
My question is for both of you. How much fun did you have voice acting and just acting in general?
Was it fun on set? Well, it wasn't a set, but you had a great time. I mean, it was.
Somebody asked me today, like, how was it when you were filming that? Was it fun? Well, I don't know. I wasn't in the thing. But
were you in your pajamas? I mean, let's set up the scene.
Yeah, nice pair of green pajamas, you know. Burlap with velour inside, you know. I thought it was great because for me, as a child, I was already into whatever we call theater later, you know, whatever we call it when we were children. So it was like playing in your room alone. You know, when you're in your cars, you go, you know, you play all the game with all your stuff. That's what it was like, except doing it on a mic and getting paid, which was pretty terrific. But it really was that kind of fun, if you could free yourself up to do that. Yeah. And I think that's the magic of it, you know, is that although it's work and it's a professional endeavor, that you really do allow yourself to be a child and play. Because I think anything you see that's animated and you hear voices, if the people aren't really playing and really having that kind of fun with it, it doesn't come to life. It just sort of sits there, you know. And I think you can hear in Nightmare Before Christmas, everybody had you can tell that they were having a great time, yeah? And it was great for me because I got to act absolutely ignorant. It was really wonderful.
That was probably as brilliant an answer as I could have ever thought of making, much less of making. The process itself when you're voice acting is generally that you're standing in front of a mic and the director and you are basically doing things over and over and over again. So the challenge is do it differently. Let's do 3 takes of one line, but do them all differently. So it really kind of fires your imagination, and either you go, oh my God, what do I do the next time, or you just improvise, and you just go, and that's the fun of it. That's what voice acting is really a lot of fun, because you just go, okay, what the hell? I'll just let it rip. And it ends up being quite a wonderful process.
Did it take you some time to get there? I mean, if you think of acting, especially screen acting, it's all the little movements, it's all the inner voice and all that stuff. But did it take you a while to kind of get into that groove of just abandoning yourself?
It wasn't hard because we had the advantage of the storyboards. We had the advantage of seeing what the movie was going to look like. So you get a sense of that this is not reality in the sort of normal, everyday kind of kitchen sink manner. This is extended reality. This is big reality. This is major. Get out there and just go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, this question is for both of you. Usually when a voice actor first sees their character, they go through a number of different reactions. And just looking at Jack Skellington and Oogie Boogie, I mean, they're like the weirdest looking characters ever. And I just wanted to know from your take, what was your first initial reaction? Like Chris, when you first saw Jack, this incredibly tall skeleton with a misshapen head,
right.
How did you react to that?
I don't remember thinking in those terms of its being, oh my God, what do I do now? Or how weird this is. Essentially, also, I had the advantage of having heard Danny sing the songs. So I kind of knew where they were going with the character. It just happened. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, every time I go into the studio now to do Jack, I sit down and he's there. You know, it just occurs.
And Ken, you had to do the voice of a great big talking burlap sack full of bugs. How did you react to even that one?
You know, when I first saw it, the first thing that I thought was, boy, he's got a big mouth. I did. I thought, look at that mouth. So whatever comes out of it has to be boisterous, you know, and big and loud and verbose. And then I looked at the body and I thought, well, he's got to have heft, you know. The voice has to feel like it matches someone hard for me with a big body, you know, that he had to have that kind of sound. So cavernous, that's the word I would think of for him, vocally. No matter what the characterization was, it needed to be cavernous and loud and overbearing, you know. So that was the first thing I thought when I saw it. Boy, I better really go outside of myself, you know, and really be loud and pushy and all those sorts of adjective things, I like to call them. Yeah, well, you know, make up a word, why not? Those things that really tell you what you have to do, and then you find a way to do it. That's the way I looked at it.
Okay, thank you.
You also did, Ken, you also did the voice of, because Oogie Boogie always reminded me of this character, but Audrey, too, in Little Shop of Horrors, is very
Well,
similar.
I did not do the original, but
No.
I've done the show 3 times. I'm actually going to do it this summer again. But I did another film called All Dogs Go to Heaven,
Right.
which was, oh, thanks. Which was another big green thing. Right? And this time it was an alligator, but he lived basically underwater and he loved opera. So again, it was a little bit of that same thing of being very front forward vocally and so forth. And they did a digital thing when I was underwater. I didn't have to do it myself, thank God. And then they dunked me and I want to say, sing, push my head under, you know. But again, it was that kind of thing where you look at the thing, you look at the drawing, and you think, okay, how do I bring that to life, and so forth. Opera was a big cue, though, because opera singers seem to, you know, they kind of talk like they're going to sing, you know. Yeah.
Hey. Hey, 2 questions. One, when, you must have had a lot of fun when you were singing the song in Christmas Town. Like, I could tell by the expression in your voice that you were having a ball just singing.
Yeah, that was, you know, Chris was actually the speaking voice of Jack, and it was the composer, Danny Elfman, did the singing voice.
Then.
But seamlessly, though, right? I mean, yeah.
But he had a ball, I could tell.
Yeah. And how, like, I know the Oogie Boogie song takes place in a casino, like, floor. How, like, you must have, when you were singing the Oogie Boogie song, you probably never thought that it would be that the scene that Oogie Boogie would be dancing and singing that song.
Well, you know what helped? I think what they did when I was recording, because they still had to do the animation of it after the recording, is they watched me. I didn't know they were doing it until later on when I saw film that they had been filming me singing.
Which they often do.
Yeah.
Does that footage exist? Did they ever release that footage of you?
I've seen clips of it and certain things they've released and whatever where and I think seeing the film later and watching the few clips that I've seen, they got some of the physicalization from what I was doing. Because as a stage actor, again, you naturally start to physicalize when you're speaking and singing or whatever. And from the singing of the song, I think they looked at some of the things I was doing, because there was a couple of things that really made me laugh, because I thought, oh, that's really me. Clever people, And, but it was a lot of fun that way, because they really did capture a lot of it. So it was good fun for everybody.
Thanks a lot, man. Thank you.
All right. And that kind of happens, I think, often in animation. They do a lot of filming of the actors actually doing the voice, and it helps in terms of the way they animate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You also played Dracula. It was not your only vampire was Jerry Dandridge. You were Dracula in a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode.
Oh, right. Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Did they? Were you cast because of Dandridge? I mean, I haven't seen the episode.
I think I was cast because I'd done a vampire. Yeah, and also I loved doing the Bela Lugosi voice.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. Oh, but of course. Are you kidding?
Yes, man.
How is it like to be Al Pacino's wife?
This is the best question of the day. How is it like to be Al Pacino's wife? Yes, man. Yes. If you've seen Dog Day Afternoon.
Who told you?
And it was kind of an amazing role, really, because there weren't too many transvestite, transgender people represented in mainstream Hollywood movies. Chris was one of them, if not the first.
That's probably the one.
So that's a great question, man.
Yeah. What was it like? Well, you sort of play it like you're in a relationship with somebody and you're having a bad time in the relationship. You haven't probably had that problem yet. but I think most of the adults in the audience have. And I had, at the time, been through a failed marriage, so I knew what that was like. And that's basically what you do. You're in a bad relationship, and what do you do about it?
Right.
How do you deal with each other? What do you talk like when you're talking to each other?
Attica, yes.
Yep.
Thanks, man.
Welcome.
Hey guys, I'd like to thank you guys for coming to an event like this. My daughter got a kick out of meeting Ken earlier. Is there somebody that you have met through your career that you were really excited to meet, or was there anybody that met you that you could tell was super excited?
Your sister. I think with many years we've been in the business now, you meet so many different people. I don't know, you're all very young, so you may not know this wonderful lady, but there was a brilliant actress, singer who worked in the MGM golden era of film musicals named Lena Horne. If you don't know who she is, go home and Google her. You should know who she is. Lena Horne. And she was doing a musical revival of Pal Joey in Los Angeles, and I was there doing the Tonight Show, and after we filmed, they said, well, what do you want to do? And I was with the late Nell Carter, and we said, we want to go see Lena Horne, So they took us to see Pal Joey, and we got to meet her afterwards. Now, to me, growing up, I'd seen her in Stormy Weather and all these wonderful films that she did in the golden era, and she was an icon, particularly for the African-American community. And meeting her was like meeting Queen Elizabeth to me, And I remember actually having a hard time speaking right off, because I thought, don't say anything stupid. Don't. I know you did not want to say anything stupid. Well, she was so literally, and I'm sure this probably is the same for a lot of people, but there was something about her that was an aura. You didn't just walk up and go, hi, my name is Joe Smith and you're Lena Horne, nice to meet you. You approached her, but she had this largeness and this sort of thing about her that you got quiet and all these things happened automatically. And like the Queen, you didn't speak until she spoke to you, And we walked up and she looked us up and down and she said, well, hello. And we went, yes, Miss Horne, it's nice to meet you. And she was really lovely and gracious and gave us some great advice. But that's the one time I remember literally being tongue-tied because I thought, oh, God, you know, this is an amazing moment.
I can sort of bring this around to Fright Night. The first time we sat down and started rehearsing with Fright Night, and there was Roddy McDowell.
Yeah.
And I had been a fan of National Velvet. I'd been a fan of How Green Was My Valley, which was Roddy's first movie when he was like 6 or 7 years
like a
old.
baby,
If you have never seen How Green Was My Valley, you must see it. It's one of the great American films ever, directed by John Ford. He was like 6 years old, and he was Hollywood history, really. So it was a thrill to sit down and talk to Roddy and hear stories about Hollywood, and he would talk about stuff like this all through the shooting of the movie, or when you went over to his house for dinner. Elizabeth Taylor sitting at the next, I mean, it was crazy, the people he knew. So,
just in relationship to this, one other moment I had was I was in La Jolla, California, and in a shopping mall, you know, mall. And I looked, and approaching me was Mercedes McCambridge.
Speaking of The Exorcist, yeah.
The Exorcist. And she did the voice of the demon in The Exorcist, which is at least half of what you experience when you see it. I mean, you see the green, you know, and of course Linda Blair's amazing work, but the voice is what you really react to, my thought, you know. And I saw her approach me, I thought, once in a lifetime is this going to happen? And she did not look like she wanted to be bothered, you know. And I said, no, I'm not letting this pass by. So make a long story short, I went up to her and I introduced myself, and she was very, you know, like, oh, God, leave me alone. I'm in La Jolla in a mall. I don't want to be bothered. And I told her in a short way that I thought her work in The Exorcist was not only brilliant, but deserved an Oscar because no one has ever received an Oscar for voice work. It isn't that often that there's that kind of opportunity, but that was one of the opportunities. Because as an actor, and the things we're talking about, her performance made such a difference to that film that it deserved to be, and I said this to her, it worked. And you know, we started talking about it, and I told her some things I thought about the work and different impacts that it had as far as the actual character in the film. And she grabbed me by the arm and she said, "You understand." She really did, I'm not joking. And I thought, Jesus Christ, you know. But that was one of those times, because she's my hero as far as voice work. Right. There has been no other work, in my opinion, that matches what she did in that film.
Thanks. Thank you. I would love to. I just love the fact that you were hanging out with Nell Carter. I would love to hear some Nell Carter stories sometime. I was a big "Give Me a Break" fan as a kid. That's really cool. You know, she was amazing.
Well, thank you both for coming. I think that I can speak for a lot of us here that you are inspiring for us and able to meet with you and talk to some of you at the
apparently very inspiring. Yes.
Well, right. Well, and you also answered a lot of other questions I had. But as a theater educator, I have to ask what kind of advice you would have for aspiring actors, whether in voice work or in musical theater, because I teach both.
Get with the best people you can get with and work with them. Education, theater education is a wonderful thing, but there's nothing like experience doing it. Be in plays wherever you can. Particularly in the theater, because that's a great way to get, you know, as a springboard for whatever kind of acting work you want to do, in my mind. And also go to school. Because your job as an actor is to reflect the world. And you can't reflect the world if you're myopic, if your focus is just on acting. It has to be also on watching people and watching people, what people do, and understanding politics, understanding what athletes do, understanding, because you're going to have to play all those people at some point in your life.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the thing I've always said to students is take advantage of the opportunity you have to study, because that's the foundation you're building on, you know. And then when you, as Chris said, you know, I've learned probably the most that I know from other actors and directors and writers and people that I've gotten to work with. And if you're really open and keen, you pick up so many things. How someone approaches a character, how a director directs, I had the opportunity to work with Trevor Nunn, who's one of the great directors, I'm sure you know. And just sitting with him in a room, watching how he dealt with each actor was like a masterclass, you know, that I took away with me. So when I've been not fortunate enough to direct things, I said, I'm going to pull that trick out, the Trevor trick, you know, speak quietly and everyone will listen more. You know, things like that. So I think the all in all of it is just always, as Chris said, absorb, 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 absorb. There was a wonderful lady, I think we both knew, I less than Chris probably, named Marion Seldes, who was a brilliant actress in the theater. No? Yeah. But she just passed away about a year or two ago. And she was one of those classical actresses, which we don't have a lot of in the American sense. You know, there's a lot of, you think of the British actresses and so forth, but she was one of those that we have and had. And in a conversation with her, she spoke about the idea of living. She said, darling, if you want to be a great actor, you have to live. And that was simple, but the best advice you could possibly have, just like Chris said. You have to live, you have to absorb, and you have to put yourself out there to absorb, which, you know, people say, oh, actors can be a little flighty, they're a little weird, they're a little that, but that's our task, because when we reflect you back to yourselves, we can only do it if we've observed you. And so we're a little weird sitting in the corner, you know, sucking on a fork or something, you know. Understand, we're trying to find out how and why and what that fork might taste like in your mouth, right? Yeah, so that's our goal, you know, absorb, absorb, and live, as Marion Seldes said.
Thank you. Thank you, Wesley. Yes, sir. Last question of the day.
Thank you for coming. Nightmare Before Christmas is my favorite movie of all time. I was just wondering for you both, what if you had the choice to be another character from the movie, who would it be?
It's a good question, man.
I think what's the professor's name?
What's his name? Finkelstein.
Professor Finkelstein, a wonderful actor named Bill Hickey, who was an acting teacher. And who talked like that in real life.
You got that little voice.
He sounded like, I mean, a strange voice. Those are the kind of characters I'd love to play. Huh?
It sounded like Betty Davis to me. Go, oh,
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah, that would be the one for me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's great. Just before we go, I have a quick question just for Chris, just because to tie it in, because your
thank you.
Yes, thanks, man. That was amazing. Your horror presence is strong, and just a question about one of the great, I think, presences and architects of the genre, and that's Dan O'Bannon, who co-wrote Alien, directed Return of the Living Dead, but he also directed you in a little-known movie called The Resurrected, just before he passed. But any quick memories of things to share about Dan?
It was hard to nail down any specific memory about Dan because he was ill when he made The Resurrected. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really get to know him terribly well. So I wish I could provide more information about him, but he was very opaque at that time. He was not feeling well all through the shoot.
All right, well, listen, on behalf of the Comic Con, on behalf of myself and everybody in this room, I want to give it up for Chris and Ken and thank them very much for being here. You can stand up if the spirit moves you. Yes.
Thank you for watching the Convention Junkies coverage of the 2018 Niagara Falls Comic Con. Please like, comment, and subscribe to see more, and let us know below what you think of this video. If you would like to help us with future projects, please visit our Patreon page.